figured we could do this in we could just talk about it, you know, for 10, 15 minutes and see what comes up. And so what I wanted to do is I'll show you a partially filled in IPA unit plan. And then what I'd like everybody to do is look at the unit context for it, and I'll kind of explain what it is. And then, you know, can we make the interpretive reading a little bit better? What could we do there? Can we add, what sort of interpersonal task would we be able to expect these Latin students to do? And what kind of presentational task would be appropriate? And so the other thing that would be cool is if we could talk a little bit about what sorts of formative tasks would we expect that we would be covering in this unit leading up to this IPA. And so just a little background on this particular thing. Let me get this thing up. Okay, so here, I hope everybody can see this well and it's not too dinky, but this would be for a Latin 2 CP course. Okay, so we have here a unit on Martial, who is a Roman poet in the 2nd century AD, super sarcastic guy, lots of little poems, you know, kind of nice introduction to Latin poetry for students because he's mean as a snake, biting humor. The students usually come to me think, you know, Latin poetry is boring, the Romans are boring, and then they see Martial and are like, whoa, I didn't know that they could do that. They wrote about stuff like that then, so he's fun. And so what I did is I put in the context here for the IPA. And so what we want to say is, like, I can read authentic, unadapted poems of Martial to discover how poetry can be used to explore the political, the social, economic, and cultural practices and philosophies of the Roman people. And I can compare these to modern society. Poems of modern society. I think it's sort of filled. So one of the things that we do to move away from translation is stuff that people have been talking about. So we're looking at, you know, you read the text and instead of putting it into English, you can summarize the main idea. You can, you know, identify supporting details. You can work with the vocabulary. You can connect things that you already know about Roman culture and history and values, etc., and make connections with the Martial poem. And you can also relate those to the modern day, different cultures, any culture pretty much after the Romans, anything they might have influenced or been influenced by. So we work that in. And then I'll show you another type of interpretive task that we do. Also with students. Presentational task, we have the students compose a poem of their own in Latin. They're told to use a pseudonym because we don't want to insult anybody. And the Romans were very, very heavy duty on slander. So, you know, and so what we want to do there is, this would be a presentational speaking task. And so the students would present their poem spoken. They don't necessarily at this point have to put it in meter. We do that in Latin 3, where the students have to address the metrics. And that gives them, by the way, a tremendous appreciation for how hard it is to write poetry. And they stop complaining about why Virgil, for example, puts his noun way up there and his adjective modifying it way down here, because they're like, he had to do that because he had to fit the meter. And then the interpersonal task for us is on a discussion forum where they discuss other people's presentational tasks. They ask them questions that the other students will need to answer. They make comments about their poems, for example. You know, and this could probably be improved upon, but at least they're talking about it. So, so this is how we address this. And then what I thought I could do is show you a little bit more of the types of things that we're doing so you can sort of see student work. And so what we're trying to do mostly, again, is moving from translation to interpretive reading. And we're really sneaky about it. We actually put in a lot more reading of the Latin than, say, the kids are getting with the text, because their actual document is also in Latin. So we're trying to accustom them to reading more interpretive reading, and get some presentational writing in there. And so this is actually what I would call an interpretive reading document. This is a lesson 2 and level 1 document that the students are doing. And what you're seeing here is this is the document with the students' work in it. And then the red stuff is my commentary using track changes in Word. And so I don't know if y'all can see my cursor, but on this side, for example, the students are asked to give a summary of the passage in Latin, not necessarily in English. And so we're trying to stay in the target language there, you know, and they're just getting used to the whole idea that the subject's in the nominative case, the object's mostly in the accusative case, you know, some verbs don't take direct objects, you know, and so they're, you know, this student is doing quite well. We have them work with vocabulary, for example. We have them answer questions about the passage. One thing I should probably say, you know, I try to get my students, and this depends a lot on how many students you have, but I try and get my students to send me documents to look over for them before they turn them in for a grade. You know, this can be kind of tough to get the students used to this, but I think they find that it's actually better. And I feel like it's better because the students actually, I think if they send you a draft and you send it back with some comments and corrections and so on, they're much more likely to look at it than if you know, they just, you know, they turn it in for the grade, you put the grade on it. A lot of times students, in my experience, don't even look at the feedback. And so this is one attempt to try and get them to actually look at this stuff. This is a level 3 student reading Caesar. So he's reading authentic Latin. And you can see, same thing, he was asked to give a summary of a passage of Caesar. So he had to read the passage, he had to summarize the salient points. He did give me in his you know, this is what I meant to say in English, because I think he was worried that his Latin didn't come through, but his Latin is awesome. So, I mean, there's really not too many problems with that. And then when I send it back to him, I can say, hey, you know, remember, you know, if you have an indirect question, we use the subjunctive there, for example. And so I think that in a lot of ways, this builds knowledge of grammar, because the students are actually using it. They're not just passively receiving it in instruction and in reading. They're actually having to use this grammar. And I think it solidifies it in their own mind, you know, everything from why do we put this ending on this verb? Why does this have to be in the subjunctive? And then the students get super inventive with it. You know, they are asked to, you know, answer questions about the passage here. This student is just doing awesome. And they really, once they get used to this system, especially if they're mined from the beginning, they don't know there's another way. So, you know, I think that this has been working well. And again, it's sneaking in more interpretive reading, and it's sneaking in more presentational writing. And I am able to see what the students can know and can do with the language so much better than I used to be able to when it was just translating. This is, I'm just showing this as one of the ways that you can also ask students about things. This is an AP student, and if y'all know AP, it's all translate. So we do all this interpretive reading, and then the students are translate, translate, translate. And so in this particular case, the student and I are talking about interpretive reading of a passage, and I'm asking them, don't translate it, let's talk about what's happening in it. And this is using Blackboard Collaborate, which is a lot like Zoom. But I can upload my PowerPoint in there, and then we're doing the chat screen so I can see everything at the same time, which is good. So you can kind of see this is another way that we can do this, you know, like what's this passage about? Where does it come from? Can you recognize it? What's happening here? And so this is sort of sneaking this stuff into the AP level. Interpretive listening is a little bit more difficult for us dead languages than it is for y'all. I think that in my experience, it's a lot easier to find you know, modern language equivalents where you can have students listen to, you know, a news show or something, and then you can ask them questions, you know. So we kind of have to do this on the fly. There are some things out there, but it's pretty easy to incorporate this kind of stuff into instructional media for me. I can say, I can read a passage to them. I can ask them questions in Latin about what's going on in the passage, and then we can all discuss it on a forum, for example. We use a lot of forums. I use them for my presentational speaking, my presentational writing, interpersonal communication. I use them for discussing the units stuff. So we use them a lot for a lot of stuff. I use rubrics as much as possible for summative assessments, and then we use the forum for quick checks to see if students are understanding what's going on. So presentational writing for us, this is where I really find out what a student knows. And again, I do this on the interpretive reading documents too, but in this particular case, a student was asked, he's describing a situation here. And I think that the one thing that I would emphasize for presentational writing, especially in Latin, is that it should be the student's own production of the Latin. It should not be, where they're adapting something. And this is especially true in presentational speaking. And we've already talked about this. We don't want a student reciting, an oration of Cicero and calling that presentational speaking. I don't. And so in order to implement these, what we do is we have discussion forum threads where students will post their presentational writing. And we do it on the forum. I used to do Twitter, and Twitter was so cool for this because you could actually have, especially for the lower levels where there's the character limit, so they couldn't be really, really vociferous. They'd have to do a series of tweets. But we could also have students talking across levels of Latin. So I could have a student tweet to a Latin 1 student, Latin 3 student could talk to a Latin 2 student. It was cool. The problem for us was access. And then also Twitter can get a little weird if the students aren't very strict. Like I had them create their own Latin only account. I told them not to share with anybody that was outside of the class, etc. But we still had some issues. And so we have gone to forums for this. But this might work great at the college level. I think it could work really good. And then, ideally you could tweet with people from outside of your program in the target language. And this is what we were trying to go for. But for middle and high school, it just wasn't quite what I wanted. It wasn't quite secure enough for me. Maybe some people have some better ideas. But we always have the students turn in a draft to the teacher for checking. And this is where we can dialogue with the student. We can explain constructions. We would like to use this. We would like to use this. This is in our, students will contact me via text. They'll Skype me. This is in the student messaging system. They email me. I get stuff from all over. And then for the summative assessment, we use a rubric. This is a Latin 2 student, by the way. Here is an example of our forum with all this. I feel like such a censor, all the student data censored out. But what we have here is the student that we just saw. This is his presentational writing. He's put it up on the forum. But he's also responding on the forum to another student's post up here. And so, this student says, Rome always wins. And he says, no. You need to ask the Goths about that. So he's my sarcastic student. And so we incorporate the interpersonal communication right now, the written ones, into the forum itself, which will lead me into the whole synchronous discussion of interpersonal communication. I do give them writing prompts. You can see a writing prompt here. This is right at the beginning of Latin 2, where we ask the students to introduce themselves. We have a lot of students coming from outside the program, and then we have ones that came up with us. And then they need to respond to other students. And students know if there's a post on the forum that is directly addressing them, they need to go back to the forum and they need to reply. And so we hope to get conversations going with that. And then presentational speaking. Again, this is the one that I insist that the students do the writing here. So they will again send me a draft. We'll work through their grammar before they do the presentation on the forum. And this is the one where it can be a little bit difficult for us because students have access issues for recording video, recording their voices. And so we do have some in-course options. We use Moodle as our LMS, and so they can use Kaltura, which is embedded in, and that allows webcams or screen captures. They can also go to outside sites. Unfortunately, GoAnimate now, I think, is pay. It's too bad because it was super fun. But they can use something like Vocaroo, which is super fast, easy to use, and then they can upload that into the forum. They can use their phone to record themselves. I do have one student. This is what you're seeing on the screen here is his draft to me. and then I have his recordings. All right, so I think that this is kind of leading into interpersonal communication. This is, I think, the biggest challenge for us online, for the reason that, you know, it kind of depends on the course that you're teaching, the type of course. But, you know, do you have a synchronous option? I know there are some online courses that where all the students are expected to meet at the same time, and you can put your interpersonal communication, say, on Blackboard Collaborate, and everybody talks together at the same time. But our courses are pretty much asynchronous. Our students are all over the map in terms of scheduling. It's very hard to require them to all be in one place at the same time. Blended, though, if you're teaching a blended course, this is where you could use the class time, say, to do your interpersonal communication amongst the students, have them do maybe their presentational speaking even there, and then you could put other modes online. So the synchronous time, I think for modern languages, this is probably really important, that the students do have this time together. And so I know that there are some modern language programs that uses a language coach system. We're trying to move to that ourselves, where, you know, the language coach can schedule a bunch of different times that the students could possibly meet. But it's been a bugaboo for us, you know, frankly. And so, you know, one of the options could be possibly that students could schedule meetings together and make recordings of their interaction. But I think the problem there for high school and middle school students, they just need more supervision. You know, they need to have a teacher's presence there. And so I think we have to decide for our own purposes, you know, what's the most important thing? That the communication is synchronous rather than asynchronous, that it's unscripted, that it's negotiation of meaning. And for me, the last two are more important than the synchronous. And so for me, implementation on a forum is fine. I don't necessarily need the students to be online at the same time, but what I do want to see is that they are dialoguing with each other, in that they are negotiating meaning. They ask each other if they don't understand something, they respond. So I think that a lot of things have to be factored into that, including safety, internet safety, and student access. We grade this by rubric, by the way. This is just an example, super quick, of a Latin 3 student that this is all interpersonal communication. She was writing about whether it was appropriate to use capital punishment for capital crimes, you know, what we would consider to be capital crimes. And so she had done her presentational writing on this. This was in a unit on Cicero, who was, you know, part lawyer. And so this is all her engaging other students with charts and maps, and she's writing a lot, and it's not necessarily all correct, but it's fine. I don't check drafts of this. I want this all to be between students. And so, you know, she came out with all of this stuff, which I just thought was super cool. She got very into it, and this took her a lot of time. Always fun to see. And it's good that she's feeling comfortable taking chances, that she doesn't have to worry so much about making mistakes. She's just trying to communicate with her colleagues.